I slow my car to a crawl as I approach my parents' Buckhead driveway, my fingers tightening around the steering wheel. 6 months. It's been 6 months since I last subjected myself to this particular form of torture. The brick colonial looks exactly the same, immaculate landscaping, pristine shutters, and that overwhelming sense of judgment radiating from every window. Taking a deep breath, I park behind my father's Mercedes and check my reflection in the rearview mirror. Perfect makeup, not a hair out of place. The armor is secure. Inside, the foyer smells of furniture polish and my mother's expensive perfume. I follow the sounds of bustling activity to the dining room, where Eleanor Walker fusses over the placement of sterling silver serving spoons. "Celeste, you're here," she says, glancing up briefly. Not a hug, not even a proper greeting. Just acknowledgement of my existence. "Would you put the water glasses out? Your father's almost done with the brisket." I nod and move toward the china cabinet, taking in the room as I do. Family photos line the walnut sideboard, mostly Preston in various poses of achievement. Preston at Harvard graduation. Preston receiving some finance award. Preston shaking hands with the mayor. There's exactly one photo of me, tucked in the corner, from high school graduation. Dad appears from the kitchen, carving knife in hand, his face flushed with pride. "Sunday brisket's almost ready," he announces, not directly addressing me. He's wearing his Kiss the Cook apron, a Father's Day gift from Preston years ago. "Smells wonderful." I lie. Arthur Walker's brisket is notoriously dry, a family tradition no one dares mention. Mom circles the table a third time, adjusting the napkins. Preston should be here any minute. He texted that he's running a bit late, something about a call with Tokyo. Of course. Preston is allowed to be late. The Golden Boy's time is valuable. As if summoned by his name, the front door swings open, and Preston's booming voice fills the house. "Hello, family." He strides into the dining room wearing a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than my first month's rent. Even on Sunday, he dresses like he's heading to a board meeting. Mom's face lights up. There he is. She rushes to hug him while Dad claps him on the shoulder. "Sorry I'm late," Preston says, loosening his tie. "Had to wrap up some details on that Kensington acquisition." Dad beams. "That's my boy, always closing deals." We settle around the table, Dad at the head, Mom to his right, Preston to his left, and me facing an empty wall. Dad attacks his brisket with the carving knife, while Mom passes dishes with the precision of someone who's hosted 1,000 Sunday dinners. "So, Preston," Dad says, serving him the best cut, "how's life treating Atlanta's financial wonderkind?" Preston laughs, accepting the plate with a nod. "Can't complain. Just closed another round of funding, 8 figures. He takes a bite of brisket, chewing thoughtfully. "Actually, I've been looking at some real estate." Mom perks up. "Oh? Where?" "West Paces. There's a modern place just listed 5.2 million. Floor-to-ceiling windows, floating staircase, the works." He gestures with his fork. "Perfect bachelor pad." Dad whistles low. "That's prime territory. I've got a viewing on Tuesday." Preston cuts into his meat. "Should be able to make an offer by the end of the week." Mom and Dad exchange proud glances. I push food around my plate, the dry brisket sticking in my throat. "How about you, Celeste?" Mom asks, almost as an afterthought. "How's that little online shop of yours?" I take a sip of water. "Actually, I've been house hunting too." The silence lasts exactly 2 seconds before all 3 of them burst into laughter. "Good one, sis," Preston says, wiping his mouth with a napkin. Dad's face shifts from amusement to concern. "Your little online store is cute, Celeste, but it's a hobby. Time for a real job." "Arthur," Mom murmurs, but there's no real protest in her voice. Preston leans back in his chair, the smug smirk I've known my entire life firmly in place. "Stick to your trinkets, sis. Leave the big moves to the adults." I say nothing, my face carefully blank. "In fact," Preston continues, reaching for his wine, "I'm looking at pouring capital into a new e-commerce player, Modern Hearth. That's the future. They're going to crush all the little hobby stores." The memory hits without warning me at 20, clutching a 5-page business plan I'd spent weeks perfecting, standing nervously in Dad's study. "What do you think?" I'd asked, hope ballooning in my chest. Dad had skimmed it for 30 seconds before patting my head. "Cute, sweetheart." Meanwhile, Preston just landed Goldman Sachs. That night, I'd made a silent vow, never to share my dreams with them again. What followed were years of cold garage nights at 2 a.m., packing boxes myself. The crushing blow of losing my $50,000 life savings to a supplier who disappeared overnight, working 3 separate jobs to rebuild while maintaining the fiction that my business was just a cute side project. Back in the present, Mom pushes a store-bought pecan pie toward me. "Have some dessert, dear. You're looking thin." I smile, the shield I built years ago firmly in place. The smile doesn't reach my eyes, but they never notice. They never do. If they only knew that the perennial house cleared $35 million last year, that the trinkets, Preston mocks, are featured in design magazines and celebrity homes, that my hobby employs 47 people who actually respect me. I should get going, I say, standing up. Work tomorrow. Preston snorts. Playing store. Meanwhile, we'll be talking real business. Mom follows me to the door, pressing a foil-wrapped package into my hands. Leftovers, since you probably don't cook much. 2. I accept them with the same practiced smile, say the expected pleasantries, and escape to my car. My hands tremble slightly on the steering wheel as I pull away from their house. For the first time in years, something inside me shifts, a clarity I haven't allowed myself before. Enough, I whisper to the empty car. I reach for my phone and dial Reese. "How was family dinner?" his familiar voice asks. No preamble needed. "Preston wants to buy a house on West Paces. 5.2 million. Reese is silent for a moment. "And?" "I want it." The words taste like freedom. "The house?" "Yes. And everything else they think I can't have." I can hear his smile through the phone. "It's about time." "It's time they learned what trinkets can build," I say, ending the call as the road ahead opens up before me. The perennial house headquarters doesn't look like a hobby business. It looks like success. On Monday morning, Reese Thornton stands at the floor-to-ceiling windows of Celeste's downtown Atlanta office, surveying the empire she's built. Modern white furniture contrasts with vibrant accent pieces from their latest collection. Elegant home goods, candles, vases, throw pillows are artfully displayed on floating shelves, each item a silent rebuke to anyone who ever called them trinkets. He turns back to his desk where quarterly reports tell the real story. Consistent growth, profit margins that would make Preston weep, and projections that point skyward. 8 figures. Not a hobby. An empire. The wall behind Reese's desk showcases what Celeste never showed her family, framed magazine covers featuring the perennial house products, industry awards, and press clippings. Home Entrepreneur of the Year. 30 under 30. Retail Disruptors. The future of home goods. The elevator doors slide open, and Celeste walks in, still dressed in the outfit from dinner. Her expression has hardened from the careful neutrality she wore at her parents' table to something sharper, more focused. "How bad was it?" Reese asks, though he already knows. "Preston's buying a house on West Paces, 5.2 million. She drops her purse on a nearby chair. "They laughed when I said I was house hunting too." Of course they did. Reese has never met the Walkers, but he's heard enough over the years to despise them. A staffer approaches with fabric swatches, hesitates when she sees Celeste's expression, then continues forward anyway. "Sorry to interrupt, but the Milan samples just arrived. I thought you'd want to see them right away." Celeste's demeanor softens. "Thank you, Amber." She takes the swatches, runs her fingers over them approvingly. "These are perfect for spring. Schedule a meeting with production tomorrow." Amber nods and leaves. The brief interaction speaks volumes: respect, not condescension. Trust, not doubt. 5 years, Reese says, returning to their conversation. 5 years we've been building this, and they still think you're playing store. Celeste walks to the windows, looking out at the Atlanta skyline. "You know what kills me?" Preston mentioned investing in Modern Hearth. "Our biggest competitor." Reese winces. "That's..." "Exactly." Celeste turns to face him. "He's trying to crush my business without even knowing it's mine." Reese remembers when he first met Celeste. He was a jaded consultant. She was a determined woman with a vision. When she offered him the COO position, everyone told him he was crazy to leave his 6-figure salary for a startup. "Everyone except Celeste. The house on West Paces," Reese says slowly. "You want it. I can afford it." She states this as fact, not boast. Easily. Reese leans against his desk. But what happens when they find out? When Preston realizes his little sister outbid him? Celeste walks to the far wall where their company vision board displays their 5-year plan. Her fingers trace over the projected growth charts, the planned product lines, the international expansion targets. I've spent years protecting their feelings, Reese. I'm done. Reese watches her, noticing the shift. This isn't the hurt daughter from dinner. This is the CEO who built an 8-figure business from nothing. The woman who lost her life savings to a scammer and clawed her way back without complaint. This isn't about revenge. She continues, her voice steady. It's about recognizing my own worth. By hiding my success, I've been enabling their dismissal. You don't owe them anything, Reese reminds her. No, but I owe myself this. She turns, clarity replacing confusion in her eyes. If Preston wants that house as a symbol of success, let him find another symbol. This one's mine. Reese nods, already reaching for his laptop. Let me pull up the listing. Hours later, they're still in the conference room. Coffee cups litter the table. Reese has his sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, as he scrolls through property details. Good news, he announces. It hasn't gone to contract yet, and the selling agent is Mary Holbrook we donated to her charity auction last year. I can get us a viewing tomorrow. Celeste studies the architectural renderings on screen, modern lines, walls of glass, floating staircase. Everything Preston described at dinner. The 5.2 million modern on West Paces, she says, each word deliberate. The one Preston wants. Buy it, all cash. Reese grins, the excitement of battle in his eyes. It's time, Celeste. Let's show them what trinkets can build. They spend another hour planning the details. The purchase will be through a LLC to keep her name off public records. The closing will be expedited. They'll submit paperwork before Preston can make his offer. For a moment, as Reese outlines the strategy, doubt flickers across Celeste's face. This will change everything with my family. Maybe that's overdue, Reese says gently. Celeste nods, the doubt replaced by determination. She signs the preliminary offer letter, officially putting her real worth on paper. Submit it first thing tomorrow, she instructs, standing to leave. Reese watches her go, pride mixing with concern. The Walkers have no idea what's coming, but neither, perhaps, does Celeste. A week later, the realtor's heels click against marble as she leads us through the empty mansion, her voice echoing in spaces that will soon be mine. Reese walks beside me, his whispered commentary making me smile despite the weight of what we're doing. All-cash offer was brilliant, he says, nodding appreciatively at the floating staircase that seems to defy gravity. They accepted within hours. Your brother never stood a chance. I run my fingertips along cool marble countertops in a kitchen that could host a small army. It wasn't even a competition. Preston waits for bank approvals and family connections. I just wrote a check. The morning light streams through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating everything Preston wanted but couldn't have. $5.2 million of modern architecture with views of the Atlanta skyline that take my breath away. Not that I'd ever admit it aloud. The sellers were practically giddy. Reese continues, testing the premium appliances with the curiosity of a child, said they'd never seen an offer come together so fast. No contingencies, no inspection period. I moved toward the enormous windows, the city sprawled before me like something I could reach out and touch. Did they mention other offers? Just one. Reese grins. Some finance guy who needed to secure funding. Preston's face flashes in my mind how he'll look when he discovers someone bought his dream house right from under him. The thought warms me more than it should. We ascend the floating staircase, each step feeling like a victory. The master bedroom spans the entire east wing, with windows on 3 sides and a bathroom bigger than my first apartment. This is where you'll sleep, Reese says, his voice softer now. Your kingdom. I stand in the center of the empty room, allowing myself to imagine for the first time. My furniture here, my art on these walls. My life, visible and undeniable. You know what would be poetic? Reese leans against the doorframe, eyes gleaming with mischief. A housewarming party. A party? I turn toward him, the idea taking root. Not just any party. The reveal party. He gestures expansively. Invite everyone who matters in Atlanta, including your family. Let them walk through these halls admiring everything before they discover who actually owns it. I picture Eleanor touching the expensive fixtures, Arthur commenting on the craftsmanship, Preston calculating square footage and property values, all without knowing. The perfect ambush. That's deliciously evil, I say, a smile spreading across my face. I love it. The next 3 weeks pass in a blur of activity. Interior designers swarm through the house like efficient ants, transforming empty spaces into something uniquely mine. I oversee every decision: the exact shade of gray for the living room walls, the specific texture of rugs beneath bare feet, lighting fixtures that cast the perfect glow. These pieces from your spring collection should be featured prominently, I tell the lead designer, pointing to items from the perennial house that have graced magazine covers. I want them everywhere. She nods, making notes. They'll be conversation pieces, for sure. Between design consultations, I make an obligatory appearance at my parents' house for coffee. Eleanor has been calling more frequently, worried about my absence from family gatherings. As I slip through the kitchen toward the powder room, I overhear Preston's agitated voice from Arthur's study. Some anonymous buyer with cash swooped in and took it. His frustration vibrates through the closed door. The West Pace's house, my house. Gone before I could even get the bank paperwork started. You'll find something better, dear. Eleanor soothes, her perpetual role as Preston's emotional bandage fully engaged. I've had my eye on that property for months, he continues, voice rising. It was perfect. Arthur's deeper tone interjects with typical fatherly authority. I'll call my banker friends. We'll get you priority on the next listing. Something will come up. I slip away unnoticed. Information gathered. Satisfaction warming my chest. They have no idea what's coming. The invitations go out a week later, heavy cream cardstock in minimalist envelopes. New West Pace's residence, housewarming, with the date, time, and address, but no host name. Reese and I review the guest list together, ensuring we've included every important connection in Atlanta's business community alongside my unsuspecting family. My phone rings the next day with Eleanor's number. Celeste, did you get one too? She asks immediately after I answer. An invitation to a housewarming on West Pace's? Must be Preston's new colleague or something. I suppress a laugh. Yes, I received one. Looks interesting. Oh, you should come. It'll be good for you to network with Preston's crowd. Her voice carries that familiar tone, the one that suggests I need help connecting with the right people. I'll be there, I assure her, choosing words carefully. You should come too. We've already RSVP'd. Preston thinks it's someone from that tech company that just opened offices downtown. Good chance to make connections. When I hang up, Reese raises an eyebrow. They took the bait? Hook, line, and sinker. Preston thinks it's a networking opportunity. As the night of the party arrives, I stand in my new bedroom, examining my reflection. The black dress cost more than most people's monthly salary, but tonight calls for armor of the highest quality. My hair falls in soft waves, makeup perfect but understated. I look successful, powerful, untouchable. Outside, the house glows with strategic lighting that highlights its modern lines. Inside, caterers arrange exquisite food on elegant platters. Every surface gleams, every detail perfect. Reese arrives first, looking sharp in his tailored suit. He whistles low as he takes in the completed transformation. It's magnificent, he says, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing server. Better than you described. We stand together at the bottom of the floating staircase, sharing a moment of solidarity before the performance begins. He raises his glass in a private toast, to the woman who built an empire while they weren't looking. I touch my glass to his, throat tight with emotion I rarely allow myself to feel. Tonight isn't about approval, it's about truth. The doorbell rings, and the first guests arrive, business acquaintances and local influencers who exclaim over the house while trying to figure out who their host might be. I move among them anonymously, letting them assume I'm just another guest. An hour later, I spot them through the crowd. Arthur entering first, followed by Eleanor clutching her designer handbag, and Preston scanning the room with the calculated gaze of someone assessing property values and net worths simultaneously. Whose house do you think this is? Eleanor asks loudly enough for me to overhear as she accepts a glass of champagne. Has to be tech money? Preston replies, running his hand along a marble countertop. Or old Atlanta wealth. Place must have cost a fortune. They wander through the ground floor, commenting on the furnishings, the architecture, the view. I follow at a distance, watching as Eleanor stops before a distinctive vase displayed prominently on a console table. "This looks like one of those things from Celeste's website," she says, bending closer to examine it. Preston scoffs, barely glancing at it. "Probably a knockoff. Real quality here." The moment has arrived. I slip away, ascending the floating staircase unseen until I reach the top. From this vantage point, I can see my entire party spread below. Reese catches my eye from across the room and raises his glass slightly our signal. He taps his glass with a spoon, the crystal chime cutting through conversation. "Ladies and gentlemen," he calls out, "I believe our host would like to say a few words." All eyes turn upward, finding me at the top of the staircase. The room falls silent as I stand above them, powerful in my elevation. I spot my family immediately. Arthur's confusion, Eleanor's surprise, Preston's narrowed eyes as he tries to understand why I'm speaking. "Welcome, everyone." I begin, my voice steady and clear. My family, in particular, was always worried about my future. They thought my hobby couldn't possibly pay the bills. So I'm glad they're here to see what that hobby bought. Welcome to my house. Absolute silence follows. In the hush, I hear the distinct sound of Preston's phone clattering to the marble floor. Arthur's face drains of color, while Eleanor's mouth opens and closes without producing sound. Around them, other guests murmur in admiration, raising glasses in my direction. Across the room, Reese beams with undisguised pride. But it's the expressions on my family's faces that I'll remember forever the moment they finally see me standing in my truth, $5.2 million of undeniable success beneath my feet. For the first time in my life, I'm not waiting for their approval. I'm simply showing them who I've always been, and it feels like freedom. The stunned silence that followed my announcement lasted precisely 5 seconds before a nervous laugh erupted from somewhere in the crowd. I remained at the top of the floating staircase, watching the party guests shift uncomfortably as they glanced between my family and me. My mother recovered first, her social training kicking in. "Celeste, stop joking." Eleanor's voice carried a forced lightness that fooled no one. "Whose house is this, really?" I descended 3 steps, maintaining the higher ground. "Mine, mother. Every square inch." Arthur pushed through the gathering crowd, his face flushed beneath his silver hair. He grabbed my elbow, pulling me aside while maintaining a strained smile for the benefit of onlookers. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he hissed, voice low but sharp as a blade. "Is this some kind of sick joke?" I disengaged my arm from his grip with a subtle twist. "No joke, no games, just fact." Behind him, Preston stood frozen, his expression cycling through emotions like a slot machine. Shock, disbelief, and finally, calculation. The wheels were turning behind those eyes, reassessing everything he thought he knew about his little sister. Around us, the party continued its awkward momentum. Servers circulated with champagne. Conversations resumed in hushed tones. The chamber quartet I'd hired played on, their strings filling the uncomfortable silence. 5.2 million. I announced, just loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Paid in cash. From my hobby." A woman I recognized from a design magazine approached, champagne flute extended toward me. "Celeste, this place is spectacular. I had no idea the Perennial House was doing so well. We featured your autumn collection last issue." Arthur's face drained of color. Eleanor clutched her pearls. "Thank you," I replied, accepting the toast. "It's been quite a year." Other guests drifted over, offering congratulations, asking questions about my business. With each interaction, my family retreated further into isolation, their decades-old narrative disintegrating in real time. I excused myself from a conversation with a local gallery owner to refresh my drink. The calculated risk had paid off. The public revelation prevented any family attempt to dismiss or minimize my success. Preston appeared beside me at the wine table, his perfect white teeth clenched in a grimace disguised as a smile. He gripped his tumbler of bourbon so tightly I thought it might shatter. "What game are you playing?" he demanded, voice low and aggressive. "There's no way you can afford this place. What did you do? Get some sugar daddy investor to front the cash?" I sipped my champagne, maintaining eye contact. "The Perennial House cleared $35 million in revenue last year, Preston. I bought this house with my money." Cash. The satisfaction of watching his eyes widen was worth every second of the years I'd spent hiding my success. He processed the information, his expression shifting as he recalculated his position. I could almost see the mental spreadsheet adjusting behind his eyes. "Why didn't you come to me for investment advice?" he asked, pivoting to salvage his ego. "I could have helped you structure things more efficiently. Tax advantages, offshore accounts." "You never asked about my business," I cut him off. "Not once in all these years. Not a single question about what I was building. Why would I come to you now?" The truth landed like a slap. Preston retreated without another word, making a beeline for Arthur in the corner. They huddled together, their hushed conversation punctuated by frequent glances in my direction. I turned to find Eleanor approaching, her emergency smile firmly in place, the same one she used when Preston crashed the Lexus at 16, or when Dad's racist comments offended dinner guests. "Celeste, darling," she air-kissed near my cheek. "What a lovely surprise. We always knew you were smart with money." The revisionist history had begun already. I sipped my champagne without responding. Arthur joined us, sliding an arm around Eleanor's waist. "Quite the surprising success," he said, emphasizing surprising, as if my achievement were some cosmic accident. "Tell us about your revenue model. How did you scale so quickly without institutional investors?" 8 years too late, they wanted answers. 8 years too late, they were interested in my business. "It's a long story," I replied, offering nothing. "We should have a family business dinner soon," Eleanor suggested, her voice honeyed with newfound respect. "To discuss opportunities. Your father has excellent contacts who might be interested in what you're doing." "Perhaps," I said, non-committal. The power shift was palpable. For the first time in my life, they were chasing me. Across the room, Reese caught my eye, raising an eyebrow in silent question. I gave a slight nod to indicate all was proceeding as planned. He moved through the crowd with practiced ease, stepping in when needed to redirect conversations or extract me from awkward encounters. As the evening progressed, I overheard a fragment of conversation between Arthur and Preston near the bar. "Temporary cash flow issues," Arthur muttered. "But if we can secure that bridge financing." Preston cut him off with a sharp headshake. "The Kensington investment went sideways. I told you it was high risk." I paused by a nearby column, pretending to examine a painting while straining to hear more. "How bad?" Arthur asked, voice tight. "Bad enough," Preston replied. "We need to talk privately, not here." I moved away before they noticed me, processing this new information. The golden boy wasn't so golden after all. For years, I'd assumed Preston's swagger was backed by genuine success. Now, I wasn't so sure. Rather than confront them immediately, I decided to observe. This unexpected vulnerability changed the equation. The knowledge itself was power I hadn't anticipated having tonight. Later, as guests mingled around the custom marble island in the kitchen, I overheard 2 financial analysts discussing Preston's firm. "Heard they lost the Westridge account last month. Major blow." Not surprised. Their last 3 investments underperformed significantly. I filed the information away, maintaining my hostess' smile while circulating through the room. When Reese approached with a fresh glass of champagne, his expression told me he'd heard similar whispers. "Interesting party," he murmured, close to my ear. "Your brother's firm isn't doing as well as he projects. Word is they've missed their last 2 quarterly targets by double digits." I accepted the champagne, our fingers brushing in the exchange. "Interesting," I replied quietly. "Let's keep our eyes open." The family that had dismissed my business acumen for years was now facing their own financial reckoning. I hadn't planned for this additional leverage, but as any good entrepreneur knows, sometimes the most valuable opportunities are the ones you didn't expect to find. 3 months of calculated business maneuvers had transformed the perennial house from a thriving company into a market predator. I sat at my executive desk, reviewing the final acquisition reports with Reese. Outside my office windows, Atlanta's skyline gleamed in the afternoon sun, a testament to ambitions realized. "Supply chain acquisition complete," Reese said, sliding another folder across my desk. "That makes 7 of Modern Hearth's key suppliers now under our umbrella." I nodded, taking in the numbers. Modern Hearth had been struggling with delivery times and quality control for weeks. Each strategic supplier acquisition had tightened the noose around their operations without leaving any fingerprints leading back to us. The market analysts released their quarterly report this morning, I said, passing him my tablet. They're calling the perennial house, the unexpected powerhouse disrupting home goods e-commerce. Reese scrolled through the report, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. And look at this paragraph about modern hearths, increasingly erratic business pivots. They're scrambling. On my desk, a notification pinged. The warehouse deal was ready for final approval. Preston had no idea we'd been negotiating behind the scenes to purchase the very building Modern Hearth operated from. One signature, and we'd control their physical distribution center too. Ready for the boardroom? Reese asked, gathering his materials. I stood, smoothing my charcoal suit. Let's finish this. In the sleek conference room overlooking the city, our executive team and lawyers waited. The mood was professional, but charged with anticipation. This wasn't just business, it was the final move in a chess game only Reese and I fully understood. The bankruptcy purchase agreement is ready for your signature, Miss Walker, our lead counsel said, sliding the document toward me. Once filed, you'll own all remaining Modern Hearth assets at approximately 12 cents on the dollar. I signed without hesitation, my signature flowing across the page with the confidence of someone who had been planning this moment for months. Congratulations, the lawyer said. You now own your largest competitor. The meeting concluded with handshakes and nods. No celebration, no champagne. This wasn't about pageantry, it was about power. Back in my office, Reese handed me the industry publication that had just hit the newsstands. The headline blazed across the cover. Modern Hearth Files, Chapter 11. E-commerce darlings' spectacular failure. They're questioning the investment firm's judgment, Reese noted, pointing to a section halfway down the page. Preston's name appears 3 times, not in a flattering context. I skimmed the article, taking in phrases like catastrophic mismanagement and investor confidence shattered. Preston Walker was being raked over the coals by the very financial press that had once celebrated him. Your brother's firm is taking a major hit on this, Reese said, watching my face for a reaction. I set down the magazine, my expression neutral. He bet against me with other people's money. He lost. The words hung in the air between us, neither celebratory nor regretful. Just facts. My phone buzzed again, the 7th call from Eleanor today. I silenced it without looking. Over the past week, my mother's attempts to reach me had escalated from occasional to frantic. Text messages popped up on my screen throughout the day, each more desperate than the last. I played the latest voicemail on speaker. Celeste, please. We need to talk. It's serious. Reese raised an eyebrow. They're finally figuring out what happened. Seems that way. I pocketed my phone. What do you think? Should I even bother? He considered the question, leaning against my desk. You owe them nothing, but hear them out if you want closure. I walked to the window, looking out at the city I'd conquered despite their dismissal. The family that had never believed in me was now scrambling for my attention. The irony wasn't lost on me. Let them come to me, I decided. On my terms. In my house. I scheduled the meeting for Sunday at 5 p.m., exactly the time family dinner had always been served. Symbolic, perhaps, but I was past caring about subtlety. That Sunday, I positioned myself at the top of my floating staircase as the security system announced their arrival. Through the massive windows, I watched them approach Arthur's shoulders, slumped in defeat, Eleanor dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, Preston trailing behind them, eyes fixed on the ground. The contrast to that Sunday dinner months ago couldn't have been more stark. The power had completely reversed. I made no move to come down as they entered my foyer, standing silent and small beneath me. Come in, I said, my voice carrying in the marble entryway. I turned without waiting for their response and led them into my living room, not offering to take their coats or provide refreshments. I settled into a single chair, leaving them to arrange themselves on the sofa opposite me. The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken history. I didn't break it. This was their meeting, their request. Let them speak first. Arthur cleared his throat, hands clasped between his knees. Celeste, we need your help. I said nothing, just raised an eyebrow. Preston has, he faltered, looking to Eleanor. My mother jumped in, voice trembling. Preston has lost everything. Everything? I repeated, my tone professional, detached. Arthur nodded, face gray. Our savings, too. We co-signed on his investment. Our retirement is gone. Eleanor leaned forward, tears spilling freely now. We need help, Celeste. Alone. Just until we get back on our feet. Preston hadn't spoken a word, hadn't even looked up from the floor. His designer clothes looked rumpled, his hair unwashed. What was it, exactly, that you lost everything on? I asked him directly. He flinched at being addressed, then muttered toward the floor. A tech startup. An e-commerce brand. You wouldn't get it. It was called Modern Hearth. I smiled. The expression felt like ice on my face. Modern Hearth, I repeated, the words precise. Our biggest competitor for the last 6 months. Did you wonder why they filed for bankruptcy last Tuesday? It's because the Perennial Houses, my company, acquired their entire supply chain. You bet against me with our parents' money. You lost. Arthur's mouth fell open. Eleanor's weeping intensified. Celeste, please, she cried. We're family. Preston finally looked up, his face twisted with anger and shame, a flush creeping up his neck. I stood, smoothing my slacks in a single fluid motion. The conversation was over. I walked calmly to my front door and pulled it open wide, letting the afternoon light spill across the marble floor. Get off my property, I said quietly. And I closed the door on their shocked faces. 3 months later, afternoon sunlight pours through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Celeste's West Paces mansion, casting long golden rectangles across the marble floor. The living room, once a showcase for potential buyers, now feels lived in, truly hers. A cashmere throw draped over the modern sectional, art pieces carefully selected for their meaning rather than their price tags, and fresh flowers arranged in a handcrafted vase from her own collection. Celeste leans forward on the sofa, studying fabric swatches spread across the coffee table. Reese sits opposite her, tablet in hand, his casual posture belying the importance of their discussion. The third quarter numbers exceeded projections by 17%. Reese says, sliding the tablet toward her. That sustainable housewares line is outselling everything else 2-to-1. Celeste nods, allowing herself a small smile. Not the shield she once wore at family dinners, but something genuine. People respond to authenticity. Who knew? She picks up a luxurious cream-colored fabric sample, running her thumb across its texture. The room feels different than it did during those first weeks after the confrontation. No lingering tension, no sense of victory needed. Just peace. About the expansion? Reese continues, scrolling through a presentation. I found a manufacturer in North Carolina. Family-owned for 3 generations, impeccable labor practices, all materials sourced within 500 miles of their facility. Celeste tilts her head, considering. Higher production costs, but lower carbon footprint, plus American-made carries weight with our demographic. Exactly what I was thinking, Reese says. Their professional shorthand flows effortlessly now, built on 3 years of partnership and trust. Did you see the industry award nomination came through? He adds casually, though his eyes betray his excitement. Design Guild's Visionary Brand category. About time, Celeste says, without the bitterness such recognition would have once triggered. No need to downplay achievements anymore, no reflexive modesty learned at her parents' table. Her phone buzzes against the marble, screen illuminating with a name. Eleanor Walker. The room seems to hold its breath. Reese watches carefully, his expression neutral but alert. Celeste glances at the phone, a brief memory flashing her family's shocked faces as the front door closed, Arthur's stunned disbelief, Eleanor's tears. For a moment, her finger hovers over the screen. 3 months ago, this call would have sent adrenaline rushing through her system. 6 months ago, she might have answered immediately, desperate for any crumb of approval. Without ceremony, she silences the call and turns the phone face down. Let's use the better fabric for this one, she says, returning to the cream-colored swatch as if the interruption never happened. Reese nods, the gesture containing volumes of understanding and approval. No discussion needed. No justification required. They move through the afternoon, conversation flowing naturally to future plans, a potential pop-up store in Chicago, collaborations with emerging artists, the winter collection's color palette. Not once does either mention the Walkers or Preston's failed investment. Celeste laughs unexpectedly at Reese's dry observation about a competitor's awkward rebranding attempt. The sound bounces off the high ceilings, unfettered and genuine. She moves to the window, observing the manicured grounds as evening approaches. Her reflection appears in the glass, shoulders relaxed, posture open, eyes clear. This house feels different now. Not a statement, not revenge, just home. As dusk settles, warm light blooms throughout the rooms, casting a golden glow on the modern angles and clean lines. Celeste and Reese walk their senior designer to the front door after finalizing the spring collection details. "Dinner at 8?" the designer asks. Marcus is bringing that chef he's been dating. Says we need an unbiased opinion on his risotto. "Wouldn't miss it," Celeste replies, the casual certainty of plans with friends, her chosen family feeling more natural than any Sunday dinner ever had. Back inside, she notices her phone on the coffee table, screen lit with notifications of 3 missed calls. Without checking them, she sets the device face down and walks toward the kitchen. She had waited her entire life to say those words. Now she discovered something unexpected. Freedom tastes better than revenge.
I am Cassidy, 33 years old, and at my father's will reading, sitting in a stuffy law office with 8 relatives. My mother laughed in my face. "Your father left you nothing," she announced to the room, swirling her iced water like it was champagne. "He hated you for 20 years, Cassidy." Just then, the lawyer pulled out a sealed brown envelope stamped with my dead father's name, read the first line silently, and slid it across the mahogany table directly toward me. I sat completely still. My Uncle Mitchell, who had not spoken to me in 13 years, leaned forward and whispered, "Open it, but not in front of her." Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the scapegoat in your own family, while the golden child got everything. You are going to want to see exactly what was inside that brown envelope. "Give it here, Cassidy, my mother," Catherine demanded. She extended a manicured hand across the table, her diamond rings catching the harsh fluorescent light of the boardroom. "Your father died absolutely bankrupt. It is probably just his unpaid medical bills or some overdue property taxes. Pass it over so Terrence can handle it with the actual estate." "Mr. Caldwell, take that back from her," Catherine snapped, glaring at the attorney when I did not immediately move. Thomas was not in his right mind during his final months. He was heavily medicated. Whatever he scribbled down or signed in secret is invalid. I am the executor of the main estate. The lawyer adjusted his glasses and looked at my mother with polite exhaustion. "Mrs. Catherine, as I just stated, this envelope was entrusted to my firm 10 years ago, long before your husband's illness. It is a separate directive entirely outside the purview of the main will. I am legally obligated to hand it directly to Cassidy." I looked at my mother, then at the thick brown envelope resting under my fingertips. Without a single word, I picked it up and slid it smoothly into my black leather designer bag. Terrence let out a loud theatrical sigh from his plush leather chair. He was my sister's husband, a towering African-American venture capitalist who treated every family gathering like a hostile corporate takeover. "Oh, let her keep it," Catherine Terrence sneered, adjusting his custom silk tie with a smug grin. "She wants to be dramatic over a dead man's trash. Let her have her little moment. It is literally all she is walking away with today anyway. The rest of the estate belongs to us." My older sister Melanie smiled, crossing her arms over her expensive cashmere sweater. "She is just mad because Dad could not afford to pay for her college. But he paid for my med school." Melanie complained loudly, grabbing her designer coat and ensuring the lawyer heard every word. "We all know she has been bitter ever since Dad co-signed the loan for my private clinic instead of helping her with her first apartment. It is just sad at this point. Honestly, Cassidy, just open it so we can all have a good laugh and go to lunch. Terrence made reservations at that new steakhouse and you are holding us up." I did not flinch. I did not mention that I had worked 3 grueling jobs to pay my own tuition while my parents handed her hundreds of thousands of dollars for a medical degree. She abandoned the second she married Terrence. I simply stood up, smoothing the front of my tailored suit, and looked around the room at the people who were supposed to be my family. "We are done here," I said quietly to Mr. Caldwell. Terrence chuckled, a low, grating sound. "Listen to her play the tough girl. Look, Cassidy, we know you are struggling. Consulting is a tough gig when you do not have a real network. Melanie and I can write you a check for $500 to cover your flight back home. Just leave the envelope. If it is debt, you cannot afford it. If it is garbage, you do not need it." I stared at Terrence. He thought I was a struggling consultant, barely making ends meet. My family had always viewed my independence as a failure because I refused to beg them for help. They had no idea I ran a highly successful crisis management firm, stepping in as a turnaround CEO for failing corporations. They saw my simple, unbranded clothing and assumed poverty, not realizing true wealth does not need to scream its name. "Keep your money, Terrence," I replied. "You might need it for your own venture soon." His jaw tightened, a flash of genuine anger crossing his face before he masked it with that familiar, arrogant smirk. Melanie immediately jumped to her husband's defense. "You are so ungrateful, Cassidy. Terrence is offering you a handout, and you act like a brat. This is exactly why Dad cut you out. You never fit in with us. You never understood how to build a legacy." I glanced at Uncle Mitchell, who was quietly packing his briefcase. He gave me a barely perceptible nod toward the door. "Enjoy your legacy, Melanie," I said. I turned on my heel and walked out of the conference room, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. As the heavy oak door swung shut behind me, I could hear Catherine's shrill voice complaining to the lawyer about my disrespectful attitude and demanding to see the contents of my father's safety deposit boxes. The elevator ride down to the parking garage felt like an eternity. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my breathing steady. I navigated through the dimly lit concrete structure until I reached my rental car. I slid into the driver's seat and immediately hit the lock button. The silence of the car wrapped around me. My hands, which had been perfectly steady in front of my family, now shook slightly as I reached into my bag and pulled out the sealed brown envelope. The paper was heavy, the edges worn, and my father's uneven handwriting spelled out my name in thick black ink. I tore the seal. I reached inside and my fingers brushed against cold metal. I pulled out a sleek black USB drive. It was heavy encrypted, the exact kind of hardware I usually saw when dealing with high-level corporate espionage. But that was not all. I reached back into the envelope and pulled out a single piece of heavy cardstock. It was an official legal document dense with tiny print and stamped with the state seal. I smoothed it out against the steering wheel and read the header. Deed of assignment. My eyes scanned the dense paragraphs, my brain struggling to process the legal jargon until I reached the bottom line. The implications hit me with the force of a freight train. A sharp gasp escaped my lips, echoing loudly in the quiet car. Everything my family thought they knew, everything they thought they owned, was a complete lie. I grabbed my laptop from the passenger seat, flipping it open with shaking hands. The screen flared to life, casting a harsh blue glow across the dark interior of my rental car. I gripped the heavy black USB drive. It felt cold against my palm. I shoved it into the port. A security prompt immediately flashed on the screen, demanding a decryption key. My mind raced. What would my father use? I tried his anniversary. Incorrect. I tried Melanie's birthday, the golden child. Incorrect. A bitter laugh escaped my throat. Of course not. I typed in the date of the only day he ever stood up to my mother, the day he drove me to the airport when I left for Chicago with nothing but 2 suitcases. The screen flashed green. Access granted. Folders cascaded across my desktop, hundreds of them. I clicked on the master file labeled The Phoenix Holding Group. Spreadsheets, legal charters, and banking routes flooded my vision. I was staring at a labyrinth of corporate shell companies and offshore accounts. The numbers at the bottom of the ledgers were staggering. Millions upon millions of dollars completely untraceable to the main estate my mother had just inherited. A violent knock on my driver's side window made me scream. I slammed the laptop shut, my heart hammering in my throat. Standing in the dim light of the parking garage was my Uncle Mitchell. He looked over his shoulder toward the elevator banks, his face tight with urgency. He knocked again, harder this time. I hesitated, then hit the unlock button. Mitchell did not go to the driver's side. He hurried around the front of the car, yanked open the passenger door, and threw himself into the seat. Before I could say a word, he slammed the door shut and instantly hit the master lock button. "Drive to the lower level," he ordered, his eyes darting around the concrete pillars. "Get us out of sight from the lobby doors." I threw the car into drive and spiraled down into the darkest corner of the underground garage, cutting the engine behind a massive cement column. I turned to him, clutching the deed of assignment against my chest. "What is going on, Mitchell? Why did you tell me to hide this?" Mitchell let out a long, ragged breath. He looked older than his 60 years, the lines around his mouth carved deep by family secrets. "Your father did not die broke, Cassidy. He died pretending to be broke to trap them." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process the words. "Trap who?" "Mom." Mitchell scoffed, a bitter sound that echoed in the quiet car. "Catherine, Melanie, and that slick-talking fraud Terrence. Open the laptop, Cassidy. Look at the Phoenix Holding Group files. Look at the asset transfers from the last 24 months. I opened the laptop again. The blue light washed over Mitchell's grim face. I navigated to the folder he mentioned. Rows of massive wire transfers appeared, all siphoning money out of my parents' joint accounts and the family estate equity. Mitchell pointed a thick, calloused finger at the screen. "2 years ago, your father got sick. Catherine thought the medication made him weak. She thought his mind was slipping. So she and Terrence went to work. Terrence likes to parade around town as a high-rolling venture capitalist, but his flagship tech startup was hemorrhaging cash. He was millions in the red. Investors were threatening to sue him for fraud. Melanie was not helping. Your golden child sister was burning through $50,000 a month on luxury vacations, designer wardrobes, and keeping up appearances at the country club." My stomach churned. Melanie had just mocked me for being poor upstairs while she was secretly bankrupting her own husband. "They needed cash fast," Mitchell continued, his voice dripping with disgust. "So Catherine forged your father's signature on power of attorney documents. She secretly remortgaged the ancestral estate, the one she is living in right now, and funneled every single penny into Terrence's failing business to keep him out of federal prison. They sucked your father's visible estate completely dry. They thought they got away with it because they thought Richard was too sedated to notice the alerts from the bank. But he did notice," I whispered, staring at the staggering figures on the screen. Mitchell smiled, a cold, predatory expression that reminded me so much of my dad. "Richard noticed everything. He played the fool. He let Catherine think she was the mastermind, but behind the scenes he reached out to me. We spent the last 2 years quietly liquidating his private assets, his stock options, his offshore accounts that Catherine knew nothing about. We moved all of it into a blind trust, the Phoenix Holding Group. He named it that for a reason, Cassidy." I looked down at the deed of assignment in my lap. The document named me as the sole owner and acting CEO of the trust. But why leave it to me? Why not just confront them? "Because confronting them would have given them time to hide the money they stole," Mitchell said. "Your father knew you were the only one in this family with the strategic mind to execute his final play. He knew you were not the struggling consultant Catherine thinks you are. He knew you built your own empire in Chicago. He needed a killer, Cassidy. He needed you." I looked back at the screen. The numbers were staggering, but something else caught my eye. The corporate structure of Phoenix Holding Group was not just a bank account. It was a lending firm. I clicked into the active accounts receivable ledger. Mitchell watched my face closely. "Tap the screen. Cassidy, open the liability section of Terrence's corporate portfolio." I scrolled down, my pulse roaring in my ears. I opened the file marked Terrence Ventures, LLC. I scanned the list of their active corporate debt, the massive loans keeping his fake tech empire afloat, the mortgages tied to my mother's estate. I looked at the column listing the primary creditor. My breath caught in my throat. I blinked, sure I was misreading the legal text. I traced my finger across the glowing screen, reading the name of the entity that held the paper on every single thing my mother, my sister, and my brother-in-law owned. The primary creditor was the Phoenix Holding Group. I slowly turned to look at Mitchell. The silence in the car was deafening. He held my gaze, his eyes shining with a mixture of grief and fierce pride. "They think they won today," Mitchell whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "Catherine thinks she inherited a free and clear estate. Terrence thinks his debts are buried in anonymous corporate shell companies. They have no idea that the very ground they walk on, the walls they sleep inside, the cars they drive belong to the trust." I looked back at the screen, then down at the deed of assignment. The Phoenix Holding Group owned the mortgages. Phoenix Holding Group owned the business loans. And I owned Phoenix Holding Group. I did not just have my father's money. I had their entire financial existence resting in the palm of my hand. I owned them body and soul. A slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. I folded the deed of assignment back into the brown envelope and locked the USB drive securely in the hidden compartment of my bag. My father had played a magnificent game of chess from his deathbed, and now it was my turn to move the pieces. I started the engine of my rental car and pulled out of the underground garage, leaving Uncle Mitchell to make his own way back. I had a funeral reception to attend. The drive to the family estate in the affluent Chicago suburbs took less than an hour. Pulling through the wrought iron gates, I looked at the sprawling stone mansion. For 20 years, this house had been a monument to my mother's vanity. The perfectly manicured hedges, the sweeping circular driveway, the imported marble fountains. It all projected an image of untouchable wealth. But as I parked behind a line of luxury vehicles, the grand estate looked completely different to me. It no longer looked like an intimidating fortress of old money. It looked like a very expensive piece of collateral, and the deed to it was currently resting against my ribcage. I walked up the wide stone steps and reached for the heavy brass door handle, but the door swung open before I could touch it. My mother stood blocking the entryway. Catherine wore a custom black morning dress that looked more suited for a fashion runway than a wake. She held a crystal glass of sparkling water, her eyes sweeping over me with familiar disdain. The scent of expensive catered food and forced sympathy wafted out from the grand foyer behind her. "You can come in to eat, Cassidy," my mother said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper so the guests inside could not hear. "But do not think you are staying the weekend. I want you to go upstairs and pack up your old bedroom by tonight. I need your things out of this house." I paused on the threshold. My father was barely in the ground for 3 hours, and she was already erasing my physical footprint from the family home. "Why the sudden rush, Mother?" "Melanie and Terrence are moving their things in permanently," she replied, taking a delicate sip from her glass. "They are expanding the master suite, and your old room is going to be knocked through to create a walk-in closet for Melanie. It is long overdue. She needs the space for her new spring collection." The casual cruelty of her words washed over me, but the sting I used to feel was completely gone. I remembered being 15 years old when she took my private bathroom and converted it into storage for Melanie's beauty pageant gowns, telling me I should be grateful I even had a roof over my head. She had spent a lifetime making sure I knew I occupied the lowest rung on the family ladder. But standing there now, knowing I owned the very floorboards she was standing on, her arrogance was almost comical. I stepped past her, brushing my shoulder against hers, and walked into the crowded foyer. The reception was in full swing. Dozens of relatives and business associates murmured in hushed tones, holding plates of artisanal sandwiches and expensive cuts of meat. Before I could even reach the dining room, a tall figure stepped directly into my path. Terrence looked down at me, his tailored morning suit pulling tight across his broad shoulders. He held a leather-bound clipboard in one hand. He flashed a brilliant fake smile at a passing aunt, playing the role of the grieving, responsible son-in-law flawlessly. But the moment we were out of earshot, his expression hardened into a glare. "Glad you decided to show up, Cassidy," Terrence said, his tone dripping with condescension. "I was just talking to the caterer." He slapped the heavy clipboard directly against my chest, forcing me to grab it before it fell. I glanced down at the invoice attached to it. The total for the food and staff was exactly $4,000. "Since you did not get any inheritance today," Terrence continued, his voice loud enough for the nearest group of relatives to hear, "consider paying for the sandwiches your contribution to the family. It is the least you can do, considering Richard paid for your entire childhood. Melanie and I have taken care of the actual funeral costs, so do not say we never help you out. He crossed his arms, staring down at me with absolute certainty. He expected me to flush with embarrassment. He expected me to stammer about not having the funds to beg my mother for a pass in front of her high society friends. He wanted to humiliate me to assert his dominance as the new patriarch of the family now that my father was gone. He wanted everyone to see the struggling outcast daughter failing to pull her weight. I looked at the invoice, then looked back up at Terrence. I did not blink. I did not argue. I reached into my designer bag, sliding my hand right past the brown envelope that held the ruin of his entire life, and pulled out my wallet. I extracted a heavy matte black metal card. The Centurion card. The invitation-only American Express that required millions in annual spending just to maintain. I signaled the head caterer, who was hovering nervously near the kitchen door. He hurried over, eyes darting between me and Terrence. "Run it," I said, handing the metal card to the caterer. "Put a 20% tip on there for your staff. They have done a wonderful job today." The caterer took the heavy card, his eyes widening as he recognized what it was, and practically sprinted away to process the payment. Terrence stared at my hand, then at the retreating caterer. The smug satisfaction wiped completely off his face. He blinked rapidly, his mind scrambling to make sense of what he had just seen. "That is a dangerous game, Cassidy," he finally muttered, leaning in close so only I could hear. "Maxing out credit cards to save face at a funeral. You are going to be paying off those sandwiches for the next 5 years. You do not have that kind of capital." I slipped my wallet back into my bag and stepped closer to him. The music in the background seemed to fade away. The chatter of the guests became white noise. I looked him dead in the eye, dropping my voice to a sharp, icy whisper. "I have plenty of capital, Terrence, enough to buy and sell you 10 times over." I patted his arm, feeling the rigid tension in his muscles. "Enjoy the master suite expansion. You and Melanie deserve a nice big bedroom. Just make sure your property taxes are up to date." Terrence froze. The color drained from his face, leaving an ashen, sickly hue behind. His confident posture crumpled instantly. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. He knew exactly what I meant. A man swimming in millions of dollars of fraudulent debt knows the exact status of his property taxes, and he knows that only the entity holding his loans would dare bring them up in casual conversation. I smiled warmly at him, turned my back, and walked toward the dining room to get a sandwich, leaving the new patriarch of the family suffocating in absolute terror. By Monday morning, the heavy scent of funeral lilies and the suffocating tension of my mother's estate were miles behind me. I stepped out of the private elevator and onto the top floor of the glittering glass high-rise that housed my crisis management firm in downtown Chicago. My family spent the last decade believing I was a struggling low-level consultant, scraping by on petty contracts. They pictured me working out of a cramped apartment, drowning in debt, forever jealous of Melanie and her successful venture capitalist husband. The reality was a stark contrast to their delusions. I was the founder and chief executive officer of one of the most ruthless turnaround firms in the Midwest. When massive corporations faced bankruptcy, hostile takeovers, or federal collapse, they called me to stop the bleeding. I commanded a team of 60 ruthless analysts and attorneys. I did not beg for a seat at the table. I owned the building. My executive assistant, Sarah, was waiting for me the second I walked through the double-glass doors. She matched my brisk pace as we walked down the sprawling corridor toward my corner office, handing me a freshly pressed espresso and a sleek silver tablet. "Welcome back, Cassidy," Sarah said, her voice strictly professional. "I am sorry for your loss. We handled the merger protocols while you were away, but there is an urgent flag on your personal portfolio. The Phoenix Holding Group accounts triggered an automated alert at 6 this morning." I stopped walking. The Phoenix Holding Group. The blind trust my father had secretly built and left entirely in my control. I pushed open the heavy oak door to my office, set my coffee on the massive marble desk, and took the tablet from Sarah. "Show me the alert," I instructed, sinking into my leather chair. Sarah tapped the screen, bringing up a complex financial ledger that projected directly onto the large, smart monitor mounted on my office wall. The numbers glowed in harsh red against the dark background. It is Vanguard Tech Solutions, Sarah explained, pulling up the corporate profile. The venture capital firm owned by your brother-in-law, Terrence. They hold a massive line of credit through Phoenix Holding Group secured against his business assets and your mother's primary residence. They just missed their monthly premium. And it is not just a late payment, Cassidy. Their corporate accounts are showing insufficient funds across the board. They are completely tapped out. I stared at the glowing red numbers on the screen. Terrence had stood in the foyer of my mother's house just 2 days ago, dripping with arrogance, mocking me for being poor. He had handed me a catering bill like I was a peasant begging for scraps, completely unaware that his own empire was running on fumes. Now the mask was slipping. Pull up their raw transaction history for the last 90 days, I ordered, leaning closer to the screen. I want to see exactly where the capital from our loans went. Terrence claimed he needed this money for server expansion and tech acquisition. Find the leak. Sarah's fingers flew across her keyboard. Within seconds, a new spreadsheet populated the monitor. It was a detailed breakdown of Vanguard Tech Solutions' outgoing wire transfers. I scanned the lines of data, my eyes narrowing as a glaring pattern emerged. The money was not going towards servers' payroll or tech acquisitions. The capital was bleeding out through a series of exorbitant consulting fees paid weekly to a third-party vendor. Click on that vendor, I said, pointing at the screen. Who owns that shell company? Sarah ran the tax identification number through our database. Her eyebrows shot up in surprise. It is registered to a Melanie Vanguard. A cold, humorless laugh escaped my throat. My sister. Melanie was supposedly the supportive, wealthy wife of a tech genius living a life of pure luxury. In reality, she was siphoning cash out of her husband's failing business to fund her own lifestyle. Look at the itemized expenditures from her account, Sarah said, reading off the screen with a tone of utter disbelief. $50,000 wired to a luxury car dealership in Beverly Hills, $30,000 to a boutique designer in Paris, $15,000 spent at a private resort in the Maldives just last week. She is pulling capital directly from the business loans to fund personal shopping sprees. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the list of designer bags, luxury cars, and 5-star vacations. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking, but it was not surprising. It triggered a memory so vivid, I could almost feel the phantom sting of it. I was 12 years old, saving every penny of my chore money in a small tin box hidden under my bed. I wanted to buy a second-hand laptop to learn coding. I had saved for 10 months. One afternoon, I came home from school to find the box empty. Melanie had taken the money to buy a designer prom dress. When I cried and begged our mother to make Melanie give it back, Catherine had simply rolled her eyes. Melanie needs to look presentable for her social circles, Catherine had told me, brushing my tears away with cold annoyance. You do not go to parties, Cassidy. You do not need the money. Let your sister shine. I looked at Sarah, my voice dropping to a harsh, steady cadence. She is still stealing my allowance, Sarah. Only now the tin box under the bed is a multi-million-dollar corporate loan, and she is too stupid to realize she is spending my money again. Terrence was not just failing as a businessman. He was a coward, letting his spoiled wife cannibalize his company because he was too terrified to tell her they were actually broke. They had mortgaged my mother's house, the very roof over her head, just so Melanie could keep up appearances at the country club. The entire Golden Child empire was built on a foundation of rotting wood and stolen cash. And now I held the match. Get Mr. Gallagher on the line, I commanded, referring to my ruthless head of legal. Sarah dialed the number and put the call on speakerphone. Gallagher answered immediately. Good morning, Cassidy. What is the target today? I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the bustling Chicago streets below. I need you to draft a formal notice of default, Gallagher. Target is Vanguard Tech Solutions, owned by Terrence Vanguard. They have breached the terms of their master loan agreement with Phoenix Holding Group. On what grounds are we accelerating the debt? Gallagher asked, the sound of rapid typing echoing over the line. Gross financial mismanagement, fraudulent allocation of funds, and breach of fiduciary duty, I replied smoothly. He took our capital under the guise of business expansion and funneled it into his wife's personal luxury accounts. I want the notice of default drafted immediately. I want it hand-delivered by a process server directly to Terrence's glass-walled office, so his entire staff can see it happen. Understood, Gallagher said. What is the cure window? 48 hours, I said, my voice as hard as steel. Give him exactly 48 hours to produce $2 million in liquid cash to bring the accounts current. If the money is not wired into the Phoenix Holding Group accounts, the second the deadline expires, we initiate immediate asset seizure. And the primary collateral, Gallagher asked. I smiled, thinking of my mother bragging about expanding her master suite. The primary collateral is Catherine's estate. If Terrence cannot pay the $2 million, we foreclose on my mother's house. Execute the order. The line went dead. I set the phone face down on the cool marble surface of my desk. The sheer weight of what I had just set into motion settled over me, not as a burden, but as an armor I had spent my entire adult life forging. Outside my floor-to-ceiling windows, the Chicago skyline stretched out in a jagged horizon of glass and steel, completely indifferent to the financial execution I had just authorized. For a long moment, the only sound in the office was the low, steady hum of the climate control system. Then the silence shattered. My personal cell phone resting next to my keyboard began to vibrate violently against the desk. The screen lit up with a rapid succession of notifications. It was the family group chat, a thread I had kept muted for the better part of a decade. I only ever checked it out of morbid curiosity or to confirm the dates of mandatory holiday dinners I planned to avoid. Today, however, the digital barrage was impossible to ignore. I picked up the device. The messages were flooding in so fast the screen struggled to keep up. My mother was leading the charge, her digital voice carrying the same shrill, demanding tone she used in person. Terrence's business is under attack by some predatory lending firm. We need to pool our resources. Catherine had typed her message, punctuated by blaring red alert emojis. I read the words twice, a cold smile touching the corners of my mouth. Predatory lending firm. Terrence had clearly sprinted home in a blind panic after the process server handed him the notice of default. He must have spun a frantic tale for my mother and Melanie, painting himself as the innocent victim of a ruthless corporate shark. He likely had not even realized yet who owned Phoenix Holding Group, or he was too terrified to admit to his wife and mother-in-law that the quiet, dismissed sister held the keys to their destruction. He was playing for time, begging for cash to plug a hole in a sinking ship. My phone buzzed again. Catherine had sent another block of text, this one aimed directly at me. Take out a loan against your 401k to help your brother-in-law. It's what family does. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of the demand left me momentarily speechless. For years, Catherine had refused to co-sign a simple student loan for my undergraduate degree, citing her need to maintain her own financial flexibility. I had worked night shifts scrubbing floors in a commercial bakery to pay my tuition. Yet now, without a second thought, she demanded I gut my own retirement savings to bail out a man who had mocked my supposed poverty just 48 hours earlier. She assumed I was a mid-level corporate drone, clinging to a meager 401k, and she viewed that imaginary safety net as rightfully hers to commandeer. I watched the typing bubbles appear and disappear as Melanie joined the chat, undoubtedly preparing to add her own layer of guilt and pressure. I did not wait for her message to land. I placed my thumbs over the keyboard and typed my response with deliberate surgical precision. I don't invest in sinking ships. I hit send. The group chat went dead. The rapid-fire typing bubbles vanished instantly. I could almost picture the scene in my mother's lavish living room. The stunned silence, the exchanging of outraged glances, the collective shock that the family scapegoat had dared to defy a direct order. 10 seconds later, my phone began to ring. The caller ID flashed Melanie's name. I swiped to accept the call and brought the phone to my ear, not saying a word. "You jealous, bitter spinster!" Melanie shrieked, her voice so loud I had to pull the phone an inch away from my head. "Who do you think you are talking to? Mom is in tears right now because of your selfish, disgusting attitude." I remained silent, letting her rage burn through the cellular connection. "You have always wanted to see us fail." Melanie spat, her breathing heavy and erratic. You have always been obsessed with my life because yours is so pathetic. You sit in your tiny apartment in Chicago entirely alone, seething with envy because I have a successful husband and a beautiful home. You could not land a man like Terrence if you tried, so you want to watch him lose his company. You are a spiteful, lonely little girl. Her insults were a familiar script, a greatest hits compilation of every insecurity she had tried to project onto me since we were teenagers. She used to stand in the doorway of my bedroom, holding her designer shopping bags, mocking my discount store clothes, telling me I would never amount to anything more than a background character in her glamorous life. Are you quite finished, Melanie? I asked, my voice completely devoid of emotion. Do not use that tone with me, she snapped. Terrence is a genius. This is just a temporary cash flow issue caused by aggressive market fluctuations. He is going to bounce back from this predatory attack, and when he does, you will be cut out of this family forever. Do not ever ask us for a dime. I walked back to my desk, running my hand along the edge of the polished marble. A genius doesn't leverage his mother-in-law's house to buy his wife designer bags, Melanie. The line went dead silent. Only the faint sound of her ragged breathing echoed through the speaker. What did you just say? She whispered, the venom in her voice suddenly replaced by a sharp, paralyzing fear. I know about the shell company, Melanie. I continued, my words dropping like stones into a glass bowl. I know about the $50,000 you wired to the Beverly Hills dealership. I know about the $30,000 you blew in Paris last month. You have been bleeding your husband's company dry to fund your shopping addiction, using capital secured by the roof over your mother's head. You did not just bankrupt your husband, you bankrupted your mother. Cassidy, how do you? Melanie stammered, her voice cracking. How could you possibly know about? I calmly hung up on Melanie, cutting off her panicked question mid-sentence. I did not need to hear her excuses. I did not need to listen to her beg. The time for talking had expired the moment my father signed that deed of assignment. I placed my cell phone back on the desk and reached for the multi-line corporate console. I pressed a button on my desk phone connecting directly to my legal department. Mr. Gallagher picked up on the first ring. Yes, Cassidy. I looked out at the city skyline, feeling the raw, undeniable power of absolute control. Freeze their corporate credit lines, I ordered, now. It took exactly 3 days for their absolute desperation to manifest into a public spectacle. Cut off from their corporate credit lines and bleeding cash by the hour, Terrence and Melanie did what cornered grifters always do. They threw a party. The invitations called it the Vanguard Innovation Gala, held at the most exclusive ballroom in downtown Chicago. It was a lavish, over-the-top charity event designed specifically to project a flawless illusion of untouchable wealth and philanthropic grace. The strategy was brutally transparent to anyone who knew how to read a balance sheet. They needed to dazzle new, unsuspecting angel investors and trap them into injecting fresh capital into the sinking ship of Vanguard Tech Solutions before my notice of default became public knowledge. They were trying to outrun a financial avalanche while wearing designer shoes. I decided to attend. I was not going to sit in my penthouse and wait for the legal clock to expire. I wanted a front row seat to their desperate performance. And more importantly, I wanted them to know exactly who was pulling the strings. I bypassed my usual understated, invisible business attire. For this night, I required armor. I stepped into a custom-tailored crimson silk gown that cost a cool $10,000. The fabric flowed around me like liquid fire, an unapologetic declaration of power. I paired it with diamond drop earrings I had purchased for myself after closing my first major corporate acquisition. My hair was styled in a sleek, immaculate blowout, and my makeup was sharp enough to cut glass. When my private driver pulled up to the velvet rope outside the ballroom, I did not just step out of the car, I descended upon the event. The ballroom was a masterpiece of financial delusion. Towering ice sculptures carved into corporate logos dominated the center of the room. Waiters in white gloves circulated with trays of vintage champagne and caviar. A string quartet played softly from a raised balcony. It was a staggering waste of capital for a company that could not even make its loan payments, but desperation breeds extravagance. I glided through the gilded doors, immediately commanding the attention of the room. Heads turned, whispers rippled through the crowd of high society elites and wealthy venture capitalists. They did not recognize me as the pathetic, struggling sister of the Vanguard family. They saw a woman radiating absolute authority and unbothered wealth. From across the room, I spotted my targets. Terrence was cornering a group of elderly, wealthy investors near the charity auction tables. Even from a distance, I could see the sheen of nervous sweat on his forehead. His usual smooth, booming laugh sounded strained and erratic as he practically begged them to look at his new prospectus. A few feet away, Melanie stood near the champagne tower. Her smile was completely brittle, her eyes darting nervously around the room. She was clutching her crystal flute so tightly, I expected the glass to shatter in her hand. Her perfect world was collapsing, and the strain was cracking her porcelain facade. Then I saw my mother. Catherine was patrolling the perimeter of the ballroom like a deeply insecure guard dog. She was scanning the crowd, ensuring the illusion of her family's superiority remained absolute and unchallenged. Her eyes swept over the entrance, glossed past me for a fraction of a second, and then snapped back with violent whiplash. I watched the color drain completely out of her face. For a moment, her brain seemed to short-circuit. She looked at the $10,000 crimson gown, the diamonds, the unapologetic posture of the daughter she had spent 33 years trying to crush into dust. Her shock quickly morphed into a familiar, venomous rage. Catherine immediately flagged down two burly security guards stationed near the coat check. She pointed a sharp, trembling finger directly at me and began marching across the polished marble floor, the guards trailing closely behind her like obedient attack dogs. I did not move. I simply stood near a massive floral arrangement, took a slow sip of my sparkling water, and waited for the collision. "What are you doing here?" Catherine hissed, her voice dropping to a harsh, panicked whisper as she reached me. She positioned her body to block me from the view of the wealthy donors nearby. "I am just enjoying the ambiance, Mother," I replied, my voice perfectly level and calm. "The ice sculptures are a lovely touch for a company currently freezing to death." Catherine's eyes blazed with a frantic, unhinged fury. She signaled the two security guards to step closer, boxing me in against the floral display. "You are leaving right now," she commanded, her jaw tight with suppressed rage. "I will not let you do this. You always try to ruin your sister's big moments, just like you ruined her sweet 16. The sheer absurdity of the accusation hung in the air between us. It was her favorite historical grievance, a perfect encapsulation of her toxic parenting. I had been rushed to the emergency room with a ruptured appendix on the night of Melanie's sweet 16 party. My mother had spent the next 15 years telling everyone that my near-fatal medical emergency was just a calculated, selfish stunt to draw attention away from Melanie's custom ice sculpture. In Catherine's twisted reality, my pain was always an inconvenience to her golden child's glory. "I am not a sick teenager anymore, Mother," I said smoothly, shifting my weight and looking down at her. "And you do not get to dictate where I stand." Catherine turned to the security guards, her voice trembling with aggressive authority. "Grab her arms and escort her out the service elevator immediately. She is a trespasser. She is trying to disrupt a private charity event. Get her out of my sight." The two massive guards stepped forward, raising their hands to grab my shoulders. I did not flinch. I did not step back. "Wait, stop right there!" A panicked voice echoed over the music. A woman in a sharp tuxedo suit holding a clipboard sprinted across the marble floor, waving her arms frantically. It was the chief event organizer, her face pale with absolute terror, as she threw herself between me and the security guards. "Stand down immediately." The organizer ordered the guards, physically pushing their arms away from me. Catherine gasped in outrage. "Excuse me, I am the mother of the host. I gave you a direct order to remove this woman. She is not on the guest list." The event organizer turned to my mother, clutching her clipboard to her chest, her breathing heavy from sprinting across the ballroom. "Ma'am, you can't throw her out," the organizer said, her voice shaking with absolute certainty. Ms. Cassidy is our platinum sponsor tonight. She funded this entire event. The mother's jaw drops. Catherine stood paralyzed. The muscles in her face went completely slack, her perfectly contoured expression melting into a mask of absolute uncomprehending horror. The two massive security guards immediately dropped their hands and took a synchronized step backward, suddenly looking anywhere but at me. The event organizer stood trembling between us, her clipboard pressed against her chest as if it could shield her from the radioactive tension radiating from my mother. For 33 years, Catherine had controlled the narrative. She had written the script where Melanie was the radiant star, and I was the unfortunate, embarrassing understudy. Hearing a stranger confirm that I was the financial architect of this entire lavish charade shattered her reality into pieces too small to glue back together. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a dry, raspy sound emerged. She looked at my diamonds, then at my gown, and finally at my eyes, searching for the struggling girl she had mocked. She found nothing but a predator looking back at her. "I suggest you return to the champagne tower, Mother," I said, my voice smooth and carrying effortlessly over the classical music playing from the balcony. "You look like you need a drink. And please do try the caviar. I paid a premium for it." Catherine took a shaky, involuntary step backward, retreating from me as if I had suddenly caught fire. She turned on her heel and practically fled toward the far side of the ballroom, nearly colliding with a waiter in her blind panic. The brief commotion had not gone unnoticed. From across the room, Terence had watched the exchange. He saw Catherine, his fiercely protective mother-in-law, retreat in visible defeat. He handed his half-empty glass to a passing waiter and began marching toward me, his heavy footsteps eating up the polished marble floor. Terence was a man who relied on physical intimidation. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried the aggressive, entitled swagger of a man who believed the world owed him its undivided attention. As he closed the distance between us, I could see the rigid tension in his jaw and the frantic darting movement of his eyes. He stopped just inches away from me, deliberately invading my personal space, trying to force me to step back and cede dominance. I planted my heels into the marble and held my ground, tilting my chin up to meet his glare. "I don't know who you're sleeping with to get this kind of money, but stay out of my business," Terence sneered, his voice dropping an octave into a harsh, threatening growl. He leaned in closer, his expensive cologne failing to mask the sour metallic scent of his nervous sweat. "You think showing up in a rented dress and throwing some cash at a charity event makes you a player? You are out of your depth, Cassidy. This is the major leagues. You are messing with corporate infrastructure you cannot possibly understand. Back off, or I will personally make sure you never work in this city again." His attempt at intimidation was so textbook it was almost boring. He was repeating the exact same aggressive posturing he had used at Thanksgiving 3 years ago, when he stood over the dinner table and loudly advised me to quit my silly consulting hobby and get a real job answering phones. He was still playing the role of the wealthy tech genius, putting the poor sister in her place. He had absolutely no idea that I held his financial autopsy in the palm of my hand. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I maintained a cool, detached smile as I slowly unclasped my sleek metallic clutch. I reached inside and pulled out a single sheet of heavy bond paper, neatly folded in thirds. "I understand corporate infrastructure perfectly, Terence," I said, my tone conversational as if we were discussing the weather. "For instance, I understand the mechanics of Series B funding rounds. I also understand exactly what happens when a founder lies to secure that capital." I unfolded the document with a sharp snap and held it up just high enough for his eyes to focus on the bold red figures printed across the page. It was a synthesized internal audit of Vanguard Tech Solutions extracted by my crisis management team earlier that afternoon. "You inflated your user numbers by 300% to secure your last round of funding, Terence. That's wire fraud." I kept my voice pitched low, forcing him to strain to hear the words that were destroying his life. "You fabricated ghost accounts. You routed investor capital through offshore shell entities to artificially pump your daily active user metrics. You lied to the banks, you lied to your board, and you used the resulting fraudulent capital to secure the loan from my firm." I watched his eyes track the numbers on the page. His pupils dilated. The aggressive alpha male posture completely collapsed. His shoulders slumped, and the color drained from his face so rapidly he looked as though he might pass out right there on the ballroom floor. The arrogant tech CEO vanished, replaced by a terrified man staring at a prison sentence. "You do not just owe my firm $2 million by tomorrow morning," I continued, stepping into the space he had just retreated from. "You have defrauded federal banks across state lines to fund your wife's shopping addiction. Give me that," Terrence hissed, snatching the paper from my hand with trembling fingers. He scanned the document frantically, his breathing turning into shallow, ragged gasps. "This is illegal. You cannot have this. These are protected internal metrics. How did you get this?" "When you default on a master loan agreement, the holding company gains immediate unrestricted access to all internal ledgers," I explained smoothly. "You signed the authorization yourself, Terrence. You were just too arrogant to read the fine print." He crumpled the paper in his fist, his head swiveling erratically as he looked around the crowded, glittering room. The string quartet was still playing a lively Vivaldi piece. The wealthy guests were still laughing and sipping my champagne. No one had noticed that the host of the gala was actively hyperventilating. He looked like a trapped animal searching for an exit that did not exist. "Mr. Terrence." The voice came from directly behind him, calm, authoritative, and completely devoid of warmth. Terrence spun around, dropping the crumpled paper onto the marble floor. Two men in dark, unwrinkled suits had materialized from the crowd. They did not have drinks in their hands. They were not smiling. They moved with the synchronized, deliberate purpose of federal agents who had already locked down the perimeter. The taller of the two men reached into his jacket pocket and casually flipped open a leather badge wallet, flashing a gold shield under the crystal chandeliers. "Mr. Terrence." The man repeated, his tone perfectly flat. "We're from the SEC. We'd like a word." The champagne glass slipped from Terrence's hand, shattering against the marble floor. The sharp crack cut through the soft music of the string quartet, drawing the eyes of the surrounding high society guests. Terrence opened his mouth to speak, but his voice completely abandoned him. He looked at the two federal agents, then at the gold shield, and finally back at me. His arrogant swagger had evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, terrified shell of a man. "Is there a private room where we can conduct this conversation, Mr. Terrence?" the second agent asked, stepping seamlessly to his left to block any potential exit. "Or would you prefer to discuss your inflated user metrics and offshore wire transfers right here in front of your prospective investors?" Terrence swallowed hard, his face glistening with a cold sweat. He gave a jerky, defeated nod and allowed the agents to flank him. As they escorted him away from the auction tables and out of the glittering ballroom, a shockwave of whispers rippled through the crowd. The wealthy donors who had been eager to write him checks just moments ago were now backing away as if he were contagious. Melanie let out a piercing, hysterical shriek from across the room, abandoning her champagne to chase after her husband and the federal agents. I stood my ground, my crimson silk gown catching the light of the crystal chandeliers. I smoothed an invisible crease from my dress and locked eyes with my mother. Catherine was frozen near the floral arrangement, her chest heaving. The realization of what I had done washed over her face. I had not just ruined their party. I had dismantled their entire fraudulent empire in under 5 minutes. I gave her a slow, cold smile, turned on my heel, and walked out the grand double doors. By Tuesday morning, the fallout was absolute. I sat behind my massive marble desk at the crisis management firm reviewing the final asset seizure documents for Vanguard Tech Solutions. The company was in freefall, and Terrence was drowning in federal legal fees. I expected Catherine to surrender. I expected her to realize she was outmatched and beg for a quiet settlement. I vastly underestimated my mother's capacity for venom. My private office line rang. I ignored it, focused on a corporate merger file. Then my personal cell phone buzzed. Then the office line rang again. Sarah walked into my office, her usual brisk, professional demeanor replaced by a look of deep concern. "Cassidy," Sarah said, gripping her silver tablet. "Your Aunt Patricia just called the main reception line." She was practically in tears. "And then your cousin Gregory called. They both asked if we had staged an intervention yet. I set my pen down, my eyes narrowing. An intervention for what exactly? Sarah hesitated. For your mental health. I leaned back in my leather chair, a cold knot forming in my stomach. Play the voicemails, I ordered. Sarah tapped her screen. Aunt Patricia's frantic voice filled the room. Sarah, please tell me Cassidy is safe. Catherine just called me weeping. She said Cassidy is having a severe psychotic break from the grief of losing her father. Catherine said Cassidy crashed Melanie's charity event screaming about imaginary bank fraud and had innocent people harassed. Catherine is terrified Cassidy might hurt herself or someone else. We need to get her committed to a psychiatric facility before she completely loses her mind. I stared at the glowing skyline outside my window. Catherine was not retreating. She was weaponizing my father's recent death to build a narrative of insanity. Instead of admitting her son-in-law was a federal criminal and she was a parasite, she was painting me as a hysterical, grieving spinster who had lost touch with reality. She was calling every extended family member and every high society contact in Chicago, spinning a web of lies to discredit the very source of their financial ruin. If I was insane, then my foreclosure on her estate and my exposure of Terrence were just the malicious, confused actions of a madwoman. My personal cell phone buzzed on the desk. The caller ID showed Uncle Mitchell, my father's older brother. He was the only person in the family who had ever seen through Catherine's flawless socialite facade. I picked up the phone. Good morning, Uncle Mitchell, I said smoothly. I assume you have spoken to my mother today. Cassidy, you need to listen to me very carefully, Uncle Mitchell said, his voice grave and urgent. I know exactly what Catherine is doing, and you cannot underestimate her. She has spent the last 4 hours calling every single person in our family directory. She is telling them you are having a mental breakdown. She is telling them you are hallucinating financial crimes and attacking Melanie out of unhinged jealousy. I know, I replied, my voice hard. She is trying to invalidate the foreclosure by destroying my credibility. It is worse than that, Uncle Mitchell warned, his tone dropping to a harsh whisper. She is laying the groundwork to have you declared legally incompetent. If she succeeds, she can seize control of the Phoenix Holding Group Trust as your conservator. Do not brush this off, Cassidy. She did the exact same thing to your father when he tried to stop her gambling habits 10 years ago. She isolated him. The words hit me like a physical strike. 10 years ago, my father had briefly threatened to cut off Catherine's access to their primary accounts. Suddenly, rumors had swirled through our family that my father was suffering from early-onset dementia. Friends stopped visiting. Relatives stopped calling him for financial advice. Catherine had successfully quarantined him, crushing his resistance by making everyone believe his mind was failing. Now she was dusting off her favorite psychological weapon and aiming it directly at me. I am not my father, Mitchell, I said, my grip tightening on the phone. I own my narrative and I own the evidence. Let her talk. Her rumors cannot stop a federal indictment. Just watch your back, Cassidy, he replied heavily. She will not stop with the family. She will go after your livelihood next. I ended the call, my mind calculating the legal counteroffensive. I needed Gallagher to draft a cease and desist order for defamation immediately. I reached for my desk phone, but Sarah suddenly burst back through the heavy oak doors. She did not bother knocking. Her face was entirely drained of color. Cassidy, we have a massive problem, Sarah said, her voice shaking as she rushed to my desk. She placed a printed email directly over the merger file I had been reviewing. It was a message from the board of directors at Sterling Global, our largest and most lucrative client. We were in the middle of negotiating a $30 million corporate turnaround contract with them. It was the crown jewel of my firm's portfolio. I scanned the heavy black text. Dear Ms. Cassidy, effective immediately, Sterling Global is pausing all current negotiations and withdrawing our letter of intent regarding your firm's crisis management services. We have recently been made aware of highly concerning rumors regarding your current mental stability and erratic personal behavior. Given the sensitive nature of our corporate restructuring, we cannot entrust our financial future to an executive experiencing a documented psychological crisis. I stared at the printed words, the reality of the sabotage settling into my bones. Catherine was not just throwing a tantrum. She was calling my corporate partners. She was actively reaching into the highest echelons of the Chicago business world, using her country club connections to poison my professional reputation. My mother was trying to destroy my multi-million-dollar career to protect her stolen wealth. "Get Gallagher in here," I said, my voice dropping to a lethal, icy calm. "We are going to war." Gallagher materialized in my office within 60 seconds, a leather folio already in hand. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I handed him the printed email from Sterling Global. He scanned it, his jaw tightening. Catherine was not just throwing a tantrum. She was executing a calculated smear campaign, leveraging her country club gossip network to poison my professional standing. I instructed Gallagher to draft a cease and desist order so aggressively worded it would make Catherine's country club lawyers choke. But paper shields were not enough. I needed to control the narrative directly. I told Sarah to schedule an emergency video conference with the Sterling Global Board of Directors for noon. I spent the next 2 hours compiling a pristine, undeniable dossier. It included Terrence's fraudulent financial statements, the official SEC filing against Vanguard Tech Solutions, and the master loan agreement bearing my signature as the chief executive officer of Phoenix Holding Group. I was not going to defend my mental health. I was going to prove my ruthless competency. At noon, the massive screen in my boardroom flickered to life. 7 grim-faced Sterling Global executives stared back at me. They expected a hysterical, unstable woman. Instead, I gave them a masterclass in crisis management. I laid out the facts methodically. I explained that the rumors were a desperate retaliation from a defaulting debtor who happened to be related to me by marriage. I showed them the SEC filing. I showed them the money trail. I did not apologize for the family drama. I framed it as a testament to my unyielding professional integrity. I told them that if I was willing to completely dismantle my own brother-in-law for attempting to defraud my firm, they could rest assured I would protect Sterling Global's assets with the exact same merciless precision. I watched their expressions shift from skeptical concern to absolute silent respect. The chairman of the board actually smiled. The crisis was averted. The $30 million contract was secured. I ended the call feeling a surge of pure, unfiltered adrenaline. Before I could even close my laptop, the heavy oak doors of the boardroom burst open. Sarah stood panting in the doorway, her usual immaculate composure completely shattered. "Cassidy, we have a massive security breach in the main lobby," Sarah said, her voice strained. "Your mother and sister just bypassed the lower security desk by tailgating a delivery courier. They are upstairs. They are screaming at the reception staff and refusing to leave." I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my tailored skirt. "What exactly are they demanding, Sarah?" Sarah swallowed hard. "They are demanding to speak to your manager. Your mother keeps telling the receptionist that you are a low-level consultant having a psychiatric breakdown, and she needs to speak to the boss of the company to get you formally terminated before you damage their reputation." A cold, dark humor settled in my chest. Catherine and Melanie had spent their entire lives underestimating me. They truly believed I was a struggling employee in a cubicle subject to the whims of some imaginary corporate superior. They thought they could waltz into a high-rise in downtown Chicago, throw a wealthy suburban tantrum, and have me discarded like trash. "Call building security," I instructed Gallagher, who was already reaching for his phone. "Have them meet me at the front desk." I walked out of the boardroom and down the long glass-walled corridor toward the main reception area. Long before I saw them, I could hear Catherine's shrill voice echoing off the marble floors. "I do not care if she is in a meeting," Catherine was yelling at my terrified lead receptionist. "You will pull her out right now. And I want the contact information for your human resources director and the president of this firm. My daughter is a severe liability to your operations. She is mentally unstable and currently under investigation for harassing my son-in-law." Melanie stood right beside her, her arms crossed, nodding emphatically. "She needs to be institutionalized," Melanie chimed in, projecting her voice so the entire floor of analysts could hear. "We are trying to protect your company from her delusions. Just bring us the man in charge." I stepped into the expansive lobby, flanked immediately by 3 towering security guards in dark suits. The reception area fell dead silent. The analysts who had been peering over their monitors quickly sat back down, pretending to work while watching the spectacle unfold. Catherine finally spotted me. Her eyes narrowed in vicious triumph. She pointed a manicured finger at my chest. There she is. I want her packed up and escorted out of this building immediately. I did not raise my voice. I did not yell. I walked slowly toward them, the click of my heels echoing sharply in the quiet room. I stopped 10 feet away, letting the absolute silence stretch until the air felt thick enough to suffocate them. "You are looking for the person in charge, Mother?" I asked, my voice carrying a quiet, lethal weight. "You want to speak to the boss?" Catherine lifted her chin arrogantly. "Yes, I want to speak to the chief executive. You are a danger to yourself and others, Cassidy. You are going to lose your little job today." I looked at Melanie, whose smug smile was slowly beginning to falter as she noticed the deferential way the massive security guards were standing behind me. Then I looked back at Catherine. "I am the CEO." I said every word crisp and unyielding. "I am the founder. I own this firm, and you are trespassing." I watched the reality hit them. It was a physical blow. Catherine's mouth fell open in a silent, grotesque shape of absolute shock. The arrogant certainty drained out of her eyes, replaced by a frantic, scrambling panic as her brain desperately tried to process the fact that the daughter she had treated like dirt was actually a corporate titan holding her financial